anything similar happened to you, or if you'd share with us how you sort of got to know this musician and know the man who was making this music.
In Philadelphia, there's a group of teenagers that had status symbols on them. In the 50s, the status symbol in North Philadelphia for certain groups of teenagers was to be into jazz. When you went to see your girlfriend, you would take what they called jams. These were the albums. You had your albums under your arm. You got on the trolley car or the bus and you rode to this girl's house and you played your jams at her house. Or if it snowed heavily and schools were closed, then you would invite people over to your house, and of course the jams were the thing. We also danced to this music. The groups at the time, J.J. Johnson, Miles Davis, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, Horace Silver, Max Roach, the Modern Jazz Quartet, etc., etc. Blue Note was the big label. Miles Davis represented as much an in, I am hip. I mean, if you said Miles Davis, you were cool. If you had Miles Davis albums, you were on top of things. And you had to have a Miles Davis story where you saw him or where somebody told you something about him. So the man was more than just a musician to the fans. That in itself answers for how much of a genius he was. Because those of us who were just fans and listening to his music, and his music reached us, for him to be that strong that we carried his albums around, and do you have the latest, and you were nothing if you didn't have the latest Miles Davis album. That in itself spoke of his power, which in 1986 is still the same. Reviewers still, before they even write about the first note, will tell you what he wore. They will tell you whether or not he faced the audience or turned his back on them. All of these special things are given to Miles because of style. Now, in terms of his genius, even if you didn't know music, you couldn't read, but if you could hear, you knew that this special musician was doing something that nobody else was doing. It wasn't so much that Miles played more notes than anybody else, because clearly there were trumpet players who could rattle off 16th notes and not even think about it. But Miles had a way of entering, and especially his ballads. I feel that any around midnight, that sort of thing, and what he did with it, that touch that he wanted, that he got from his group. One of my favorite Miles Davis stories has nothing to do with having met Miles. It was about us, about the fellas discussing Miles Davis, without Miles being around, without Miles provoking it. Just sit down and you have a discussion and just talk about Miles Davis. And it was always that whenever Miles broke up a quintet and the rhythm section went, that would be the end. So I don't see how Miles is going to get along without Red's Garland. And Miles would put together a Wynton Kelly or a Bill Evans, a Chick Corea, or even, I guess, one of the most important changes was when he went with Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter and Tony Williams. Well, drummers were always a favorite, and to acquire Tony, we knew it would be fantastic, because just the fact that he was 17 years old or 16 or whatever Tony was, that was okay. But this new kid, Herbie Hancock, we didn't know if Herbie could follow Wynton, could follow Bill Evans, could follow Ray Garland. But always, Miles put together a band that was bad. He put together forms of music that were different. I still loved what he was doing when he went into that period, and I guess it was the 70s and the Fillmore albums and a lot of Indian and African sounds coming out, and he had a wah-wah pedal on his trumpet. I guess this was before he retired. But I feel that I enjoyed what he was doing through the Michael Henderson period. I guess that is his name. The Michael Henderson period, where he would set up no more than maybe 4 notes for the theme and then play around it. I have enjoyed everything he has done. The period of my teenage years and dating and carrying those jams around, Miles was the person that we all talked about. No matter what he did, it was always super, super special. His silence, his look, everything was super special. And I'm quite sure that there are thousands of 48-year-old, 49, 50-year-old men who tried to walk, stand, give a look, and perhaps even talk like Miles. I know that it is quite possible for them to, up to this point, even try and dress like him. The first time I saw Miles Davis was at a club called the Showboat, Broad Lombard in Philadelphia. And I went down to see Miles Davis. I stood in line. I was at the end. I had $2, and I got in to see Miles, I guess, about 11 o'clock. And he played, and when he came off, I wanted to just talk to him. I didn't have anything to say, just wanted to talk to him. Because he was my hero. And I saw him go up and sit on the steps, which led to the lobby of this hotel. I think it was called the Dunbar Hotel, I'm not sure. And I saw him, and I started to go up, but he had this look on his face. And so I decided to go back over and stand in the corner with my ice melted ginger ale and just stand there. That was the first time I ever saw him. I thoroughly enjoyed him. I have never been a person to understand why the press would write negative things about a man who had his back turned, because it really didn't mean anything to me. I came to hear him play. It wasn't essential that a performer face me and or keep his or her eyes open when they played. I was looking for the best performance that could be given by the performer. And I've always felt that the media in its tolerance and lack of tolerance, rather, wanted something to say and put their 2 cents in and become as much of a genius as Miles Davis. So the way to do that is just to say something negative. But the turning of his back to face his own band, I could understand that. As long as the man played and I could hear, love, understand what he was doing, it was all right for my $2, $5, or whatever it was. It's style. I always looked at it as style, and but all of the musicians in that particular period of the 50s wore those Ivy League suits and ties, whatever hairstyle they wanted to acquire or whatever, was solely up to them. But that was a way of dressing which we all emulated. But Miles's style, clothes may have been a part of it, but it was a part of all of the entertainers, right on into the rhythm and blues groups. Mr. B, Dizzy Gillespie with the goatee or whatever. A whole lot of us started growing, just having a little hair thing hanging down. But that was the hero thing. But Miles was just a totally different person. Cool. Everybody played on whatever it was he did. Everybody was allowed to editorialize, a shrug of the shoulder, a turn. And one of the things I always loved about musicians was that when they were on the bandstand, they finish a solo and they go over and just say something to another musician, and the musician would laugh, and that was a sort of inside thing that I envied. I wanted to know what it was that Miles said to somebody that made him laugh. And he still does that. I just saw him at a festival, and he went over to his drummer and looked at him, did something, and the drummer laughed, and nobody knows except the two of them, I guess, and the fellows in the group exactly what went down. But it's a part of that style. It's a part of that cool, and he always will be. I mean, even in a wheelchair, Miles will still have style and be cool. Well, I think in that particular period, it may not be as prevalent today. But the blues is always thought of. I mean, it's really prejudice, is what it is, against the South. So rhythm and blues is Southern. Jazz, progressive jazz, is thought of as being quite Northern. Even your forms today of contemporary rhythm and blues, rock, or whatever they call it. A great deal of that can come from the South. So jazz, the progressive jazz, whatever they wanted to label it, coming from that particular period of the 50s into the 60s, was, I think, in fact, given to the North so many different forms of avant-garde, was thought of as being intellectual music. Modern jazz quartet with their European, American, and blues feel. Chico Hamilton from the West Coast. All of it was probably thought of as being quite intellectual, and perhaps a great deal of snobbery went on with it. But our particular group, we were not without our lower economic, uh, non-formally educated people who really, really, quote unquote, dug it. Um, I think that it's quite possible that there would be people who would really dig pure rhythm and blues and jazz at the same time. My father and I were always in conflict because my father's claim was that was not music. My father would rather see 20 pieces and Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Jimmy Lunsford, as opposed to five five pieces banging away and ruining Love for Sale. But once again, the aura, it it has to do with um, people discussing Miles, wanting to discuss Miles, people having stories about Miles, whether they're truthful or whether they're lies. They have their Miles Davis stories, and there are millions of them. So that when he laid off and he didn't play uh, for whatever amount of time it was, people were still talking about Miles. If they said, well, he's stories from he's dying, the stories of he's fat and can't play anymore, stories of he's so drugged out he'll never come back. It didn't make any difference what the negative things were. When the word came that Miles was going to come back, the only question was, uh, had he been sick enough that he couldn't play, and what was it they were going to see? But this man has such an inertia that people lined up to buy tickets before the tickets were even printed. I mean, they were just going around New York City looking for whoever had something. You could have sold strips of the New York Times that said, this gets you in to see Miles Davis. People were ready. And I remember Milt Jackson saying to me, after I left the first show of his quote unquote comeback, Milt said, how was it? And I said it was wonderful because I loved what he was doing. I loved what he was doing because, with the new music, because I felt that Miles was the one person who could show these people who thought they were doing something new how it could be done, and done intelligently, with feeling, and of course, it's Miles Davis's styling. So Milt said to me, I just hope that he plays something from the old days. I said, Milt, he's not going to do that. So Milt said, well, I just hope that he plays something like around midnight. I said, Milt, his group is not set up to play that way. You're going to have to deal with Miles Davis working on something different. So Mel said, well, I just hope if he just plays. I said, Melton, and then Milt stopped talking. The great thing that I love about Miles Davis is his ability to change and be ahead. The period with, I go back to the period with Michael Henderson, when Miles played, he was playing the blues, and all he did was had Michael take out certain notes that ordinarily the bass player would follow through with. And so Michael was playing space and then adding other colors to it. And then he let his rhythm section fill in those things. I think that Tio Macero is a person that can probably tell you more than what I'm trying to say. But that Avery Fisher, it was wonderful, and I just saw him recently, and to see 18,000 people standing up and cheering, and these are not people in their 40s and 50s; these are people in their teens who now know who Miles Davis is. I remember flying. I remember flying into Lake Tahoe, and I had a 2-week engagement at Harris Tahoe, and stopped off on the California side and went into this record store. Now, this is when LSD and Haight-Ashbury and everything was riding strong. And I walked in to this, what is supposed to be a record store, and they had tons and tons of tapes, and that was when the cartridges were this big. And I said to the lady, I'd like to, where do you have the Miles Davis tapes? And the lady said, who is that? And I wanted to have her bronzed because, I mean, there should be a statue. There should be a statue of a woman who works in the record store and would say, who is Miles Davis? One of the things that's important to me is that I don't care how big I become as an entertainer. Miles Davis is my friend. And in my lifetime, I mean, that's good enough for me. I mean, that's fine. Dizzy Gillespie is my friend. These are people who are my heroes. I met Jackie Robinson. I met Joe Louis. And the fact that Miles Davis sometimes calls me on the phone just to chit-chat. I've done a lot of things and I've made a lot of people happy. But I go back to my wife. I say, Camille, Miles called. And she knows that I'm bragging.
Camera roll 76 is up.
Lord, if you tell us a little bit about meeting Miles. I mean, obviously you grew up like a lot of us, listening to his music, getting to see him perform, but somewhere along the line, and I think a lot of our listeners and viewers know that Miles is not the easiest person to meet and get to know. I wonder if you could share with us how that chemistry evolved.
I think that with me, the most important thing you have to understand is his honesty. He will say exactly what he feels, and he will not waste an awful lot of words. He has a great sense of humor and respects performers who have a sense of humor. But I've also seen Miles get dressed up in Las Vegas with Cicely and leave the hotel I was working in and go to Caesar's Palace and see Willie Nelson. Now, that's got to be a couple that you would have to say, what? He came back from seeing Willie Nelson And anybody sitting there waiting for Miles Davis to say that was the squarest band I've ever seen in my life, he had nothing but praise about what Willie Nelson was doing and how Willie worked as a professional person, and had nothing negative to say. Nothing about Willie can't sing, Willie can't play, or whether Willie's drummer is no good. And I think that's important. Those of us who project our feelings of hipness and putting our prejudices into that position. I'm not talking about white versus black and who can play and who can't. I think that Miles will give you his full, honest, unbiased opinion. And it makes, as far as I'm concerned, a very, very good relationship for me. I don't see him as an older brother to me or a father figure. I just see him as a hip figure. And I enjoy being around him. It was Miles who introduced the Hotel du Cap to Camille and me. And we've been going there straight on for 16 years. Well, what I'm talking about is Miles Davis has another step in class above the rest of the crowd. When you look at it, it isn't just clothing, it's automobiles. He was probably the first one that I know of all the musicians, to cop a Ferrari. And of course, he did some foolish things with it. You can't get a Ferrari and try and drive 125 miles around East River Drive. Potholes alone will stop you from, but Miles always had a Ferrari, always had some kind of Maserati. Miles probably was the first one to have a private plane. And so the Hotel du Cap, which in Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous is the number one hotel in all of the world as far as human beings are concerned. Well, Miles took Camille and me there 16, 17 years ago. At that time, he was with Betty Davis. So, as far as friendship is concerned, his clothing, his tastes in food, lovely, beautiful automobiles, homes, furniture styling. It all goes together.
I'll ask you about something that I think many people shared your concern but couldn't act on that concern perhaps the same way you could. This was a period when Miles was ill, was in great pain because of the hip injury. And I think there's some mystery about what were the forces or who were the people who really were able to convince him that it was not time to stop, that he could play, that he did have people around him who could be supportive and who believed not only in his work but in him. Can you talk about that period?
No, because I don't. It's just my feeling that after Cicely, I don't know anybody who could convince him to leave the hospital, pick up the horn, and play again, other than Miles Davis. I think he's just that way. And if Miles said I'm wrong, I wouldn't be surprised. It's just my feeling. I've never been one to become friends of the friend of a star, because I don't know who's going to be there and who isn't going to be there. And unless they have the qualities, that make that person a friend to me, then I really don't pay attention that much attention to them. I'm not rude to them, but I just don't pay that much attention. And I do know that Cecily appeared to be the person who was always there to make him behave. And surely I think without Cecily being around to beat him up at the proper time, that some negative things could have happened that would have resulted in his never being able to go back on the stage again. But then again, that's a story that he would have to tell in order for you to get the truth. But I do feel that he's a very, very fortunate man, because most of us in this business, no matter what we've done in our lifetime, if there is no one there who truly loves you and has your interest at stake, you'll be a wasted person. So I think in that period of his sickness and his not playing, for whatever length of time he went, the strongest force perhaps would have to be Cecily.